one of the first things that Joel did was align. That was the top of his list. Let's align. We were so unaligned in the most basic ways, Ryan. Some of our sites were meeting on Wednesday nights, doing middle school and high school combined. Some of our sites were doing middle school on Sunday and high school on Sunday nights. And some people just weren't even doing middle school or high. I mean, it was just it was all over the place. So as basic as it sounds, the first play was let's align. If we can align, we can at least all together start working towards the same goals and the same vision. So before there was even vision, there was alignment. Let's align on the basics. And once we figured this out, it's kind of felt like everything we've tried, and I think this is the favor of God, everything we've thrown at the wall is just kind of stuck. It's worked. And I think part of that is just we're aligned. We're all going after the same thing. So you have a little bit more weight behind some things when you're throwing, right? We've got more firepower because all of our sites, all of our staff, we're working towards the same thing instead of us just kind of having a really diluted type of, team where I'm working on this over here and you're working on this over here. It just feels like there's no power really going into anything. We're on mission together. So that was the first thing. That was the biggest thing.
Well, yeah, Brody, thanks for coming on, my man. Why don't you introduce yourself? Man. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and okay. we'll roll.
Well, so I work for a church in Cincinnati called Crossroads Church, and I've been here leading part of their student ministry for almost 3 years. So my wife and I are not from Cincinnati. We are both from Michigan, and about 3 years ago, we moved down here for jobs at Crossroads to work in their student ministry. So that's where we're at currently. This is, this is the 9th year of ministry for me. And I've worked in 5 different churches, and this is by far the best one yet. I mean, we love it here. Never ever thought, especially being Michigan people, never thought we would find a home in Ohio ever. In fact, almost made us want to vomit when we thought about moving to Ohio. And then all of a sudden we got here, and it was just, way better than we could have ever expected. So we love our church, love the city and our community, and our student ministry is super fun. Our team is great. So we're loving it, man. No intentions of leaving anytime soon. And I'm excited for today, man. Excited to chat with you.
I do have a question though. Cincinnati chili. I've heard great things.
Don't get me
I've heard
started.
Terrible. I've heard it's like Hormel chili put on spaghetti, and you're like worst thing ever.
It is.
So we're gonna go there first.
Disgusting. Okay. Let me tell you about it. It is gross. I'm not a Cincinnati guy, obviously. So the born and bred Cincinnati. Well. Yeah, you know what? I am also. We'll get into this. I am a homeless NFL fan. Because I grew up in Michigan, so the Detroit Lions have just beat me down to my knees and have given me no hope for my whole life. Of course, this year they're good, but it's way too far gone for me to even care about them anymore. So moving to Cincinnati, of course, the first year we got here, Bengals went to the Super Bowl. So I feel like I'm a little bit of a bandwagon fan, but either way, Houday, baby, Houday. Come on.
Right, yeah.
Okay. Are you a Chiefs fan?
Hardcore. Yeah.
Come on, dude.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It was a really good weekend for Mahomes, dude. He looked really good at the end of the game there. Loved the whole.
He looked phenomenal. Receivers are on point.
Real good look for
most
him.
Drops
complaining.
in the NFL. That's a stat we want to keep sharing. Okay,
I'm just giving you a hard time.
Before we get into the good stuff, I really need to know about Cincinnati chili. What's the Skyline?
Oh, right. Yeah. Okay, so Skyline chili is for some reason, one of the things that Cincinnati is famous for. I don't get it because it's one of the worst parts about Cincinnati. When we moved here, it was the very first week that we lived here, and it's a kind of a rite of passage living in Cincinnati. You have to go to Skyline. So my wife and I went to Skyline on our anniversary, thinking this is cool. We're going to do new city. We're going to do the new city thing on our anniversary, mark this moment as a really big moment in our life. And we show up to Skyline. I had no idea what to expect, but it is, it's a chain. It's like a fast food chain. So for some reason I was thinking this would be kind of like a diner, maybe a little bit more of a upscale, not classy or elegant, but just a little bit more sophisticated for how popular it was.
Yeah.
And it's basically if McDonald's served only chili. So that was shocking at first. And we walk in, and we just order the, the 2-way, 3-way, whatever it is, chili. And they put in front of us this plate of spaghetti with no seasoning. And on top of it is not chili. It is not chili. Okay. I'm from Michigan, and it's cold up there. Like our chili, it keeps you warm in the winter.
Chili.
Yeah. Beans, meat, vegetables, chili has to be thick. There has to be a lot in it. This is like a soupy water. It's like the consistency of a really, really thin taco meat. I mean, it's just disgusting. And they throw it on top of the chili, or on top of the spaghetti, with hot dogs, and they have like cinnamon and chocolate in it. And there you go. That's Skyline chili. It is disgusting.
Dang. Okay.
Absolutely disgusting.
Well, good to know. Yeah. I've heard mixed reviews. I've never been to Cincinnati. It's on my bucket list. Gotta get out.
Super high on the bucket list. There's like, there's London, and then there's more Europe, and then Cincinnati right underneath it. Yeah.
Yeah. But I would love to hear a little bit more about what you guys do as a ministry there, because I reached out, to you because I know like you guys have an exploding church, and God's done some amazing things through not just your church, but your student ministry. So like, tell us a little bit about that, man. What has God been up to that you're excited about? Share maybe a story or two. Would love to hear.
Wow. Okay. All right. Well, let me start. I could talk for forever on this because I'm as excited as anybody about what God's doing around here. Crossroads is 27 years old. So 27 years ago, this big, massive place started with 11 people who, like 11 young adults who just wanted to create a version of church that was for people who have totally given up on church but haven't given up on God. And 27 years later, it is what it is now. This really, really massive, influential place, and hundreds of thousands of people have come to know Jesus here and been introduced to Jesus, and unbelievable story after story after story. Crossroads, though, for 27 years, more or less, and our organization will be the first to admit it, our lead pastor would be the first to admit it, more or less has neglected our student ministry. So for 27 years, Crossroads has never existed without kids ministry. So we have a booming kids club. It's what we call our kids ministry, is called Kids Club. Booming. I mean, it is like a well-oiled machine, and thousands of kids are in Kids Club every single weekend, and they love it. So there's never been a day where Crossroads existed without Kids Club. There's been decades where Crossroads has existed without a student ministry.
Really?
Our lead pastor, pastor Brian said it perfectly. He goes, I feel like Crossroads is like a dad who set out to change the world, and he did it. Like he made a huge impact on the world, but he neglected his kids at home in the process. Wow. It's kind of Crossroads' relationship historically with student ministry. And of course,
some of that's life stage, right? Well, I mean, because when you first plant a church, it's probably mostly young people, right? It's people in their 20s and 30s, so you don't really have a whole lot of teens. Yeah. That was one of the things, having a conversation, if you go back, a few episodes with John Rush, he was at Elevation Church. He was like, it kind of was a youth ministry. Sunday morning was kind of like a youth ministry. Most people in their 20s, like, just ain't going to church together. And then all those people have kids, and it takes a while. And so it's like you sort of evolve into it, right?
Right. Yep, for sure. I think a lot of Crossroads story is similar to that. Young people to start off with, and then all of a sudden, you get 27 years into the church, and you realize, wow, we just kind of didn't do this. We've never done this. Now we have to figure it out, because the average age of our church is not 27 anymore. The average age of our church attender is in their 50s now, 50s and 60s, and they have grandkids. Their kids are having kids. So we're a little bit behind the game. So anyways, long story short, about 3 years ago, Crossroads decided, man, this is not working. Student ministry is not working. It's never worked. We have got to completely re-engineer and redesign it. So they went and hired a guy named Joel Fireball, who's my boss, and he leads all of our student ministry at Crossroads. He and I were working at a church in Michigan together. That's how I know Joel. And they just wanted a guy who knew how to win in student ministry, and they hired Joel and brought him in. That was 3 years ago. And when he got hired, I applied to come and work here with him. And one thing led to another, and his wife Anna and my wife Megan and he and I moved down here years ago to try and re-engineer student ministry, and it's been awesome. So none of the I cannot take credit for anything. I hope that didn't sound like a setup for like, hey man, 3 years ago it sucked and now it's going really good, and like that's all on us. I'm just giving a little bit of context for what Crossroads relationship was with student ministry up until 3 years ago. And
what did you walk into? I remember walking into 6.5 years ago to my student ministry, and I'm like, okay, there's 30 kids here, none of them are friends. This is gonna be tough. Like I don't really know, and it was my first time ever. I mean, this is the only youth ministry I've ever been. I've served at is the one I'm still at. And I was like, I don't even know where to start, but I knew when I walked into, it wasn't great. So what did you walk into? Maybe some of the good, some of the bad that you were like, hey, this is where we're starting. And then I would love to hear kind of like, how did you guys craft a vision for where you were going to go?
Well, so at my site, I work for our broadcast location, and we're like most multi-site churches. The broadcast site is typically the biggest, so we're the biggest site. And right now, Oakley, the site that I work for, is just about 8,000 people, just under 8,000 people. Before COVID, it was like 10 to 12,000 people. And then obviously, like everywhere else, COVID just kind of changed the game and kind of tanked everybody's, attendance. But I started working here in 2021. The first Sunday in 2021, between middle school, so 6th grade, and high school, 12th grade, between 3 middle school services and a high school service, the first weekend in January 2021, we had 32 students between middle school and high school at a church campus our size.
Let's go.
So that was the state of the ministry. Now, it's not to say that there weren't really, really talented people on our team. Like so much of our team still consists of people who were here before 3 years ago. It was a combination of things like COVID, things like our church just not being ready yet to invest in student ministry. So we kind of stepped into that environment, and 32 students and about, I don't know, like 10 volunteers. And wow. And that's some of the bad. Like, that's pretty obvious. You can just kind of like quantify how bad that is.
But you imagine how many students are just of your members' kids, or I don't know how you channel membership, but like how many of them are just not, the potential of like all these families. You're like I know there's so many kids that want to get connected. They just haven't really, there's not an on-ramp.
Oh, 1,000%. Yeah. It is not like there were only 32 students in our church and our campus. There's hundreds and hundreds. They just weren't engaged in our student ministry. So that was kind of the problem in front of us. How do we create a student ministry that can engage at the minimum? We're not even talking about the amount of students that are in our city, but the minimum, the amount of students that we already know are coming here with their families. How can we engage them better? So that was some of the bad. Some of the good was, well, at least what I stepped into, was an organization with a ton of firepower and opportunity, saying, we are going to go all in on student ministry. So whatever you guys think is right, let's go for it. Let's shoot for the moon. Let's make aggressive mistakes, and let's try and fix this thing. So a ton of if you could say credit, whatever the word would be, just to say we feel really lucky to work for a church whose leadership is just unashamed to say we're going to go all in on the next generation right now. So that's a really, really fun part of our job. Makes it a lot easier, that's for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. So when you came into that, and it probably helps that you knew your boss before. I know that there's people that are going to watch this, listen to this, that are like, I don't really know who my boss is. It's kind of 2 or 3 different people, or maybe you're at a smaller church where you're like, it's me and the senior pastor, and I'm kind of on an island here. And so, or everywhere in between. I know that can be really, really tricky, but I know the important thing is, regardless of where you're at, to get really clear on, hey, this is where we are. This is reality, but like, this is the goal of where we really want to go.
Yeah.
Because if that's not clear, you don't know how to prioritize. You don't know how to execute. But tell me a little bit about, what did you guys do? Like, how did you start to craft a vision when you walked in? You're like, we have 30 kids coming of our campus of 8,000. Like, and we're coming out of one of the greatest, most crisis in modern history. Socially, especially for students. So it's like, we need it more than ever, and we have little to no traction. What did you do?
Man, I could talk a long time on this. But one of the very first things that we did was align. So we are a multi-site ministry. It means we have multiple campuses. And no one creates a multi-site church because it's easier. It is way harder. It is not one of the pros and cons. It's not on the pro side of the pros and cons list when a church is going, hey, should we launch another campus? Should we go to 3, 4, 5 campuses? No one's going, hey, let's do it because it's easier. Student ministry, I feel like, is on the bleeding edge of the ministries where it's like, this is the most difficult thing we could have done. Like being multi-site and trying to do student ministry is hard because of something called alignment. How in the world can you create one playbook in a student ministry that works in multiple different contexts? Our is a city like right in the heart of Cincinnati. So we're incredibly diverse. We serve a ton of different cultures and demographics. How can a student ministry playbook work here that also works in Lexington, Kentucky, or also works in Mason, Ohio, which is a really suburban site? So, and that's not unique, obviously, to student ministry. That's unique to multi-site ministry. But one of the first things that Joel did was align. That was the top of his list. Let's align. We were so unaligned in the most basic ways, Ryan. Some of our sites were meeting on Wednesday nights, doing middle school and high school combined. Some of our sites were doing middle school on Sunday and high school on Sunday nights. And some people just weren't even doing middle school or high. I mean, it was just it was all over the place. So as basic as it sounds, the first play was let's align. If we can align, we can at least all together start working towards the same goals and the same vision. So before there was even vision, there was alignment. Let's align on the basics. And once we figured that out, it's kind of felt like everything we've tried, and I think this is the favor of God. Everything we've thrown at the wall is just kind of stuck. It's worked, and I think a part of that is just we're aligned. We're all going after the same thing. So you have a little bit more weight behind some things when you're throwing, right? We've got more firepower because all of our sites, all of our staff, we're working towards the same thing instead of us just kind of having a really diluted type of, team where I'm working on this over here and you're working on this over here. It just feels like there's no power really going into anything. We're on mission together. So that was the first thing. That was the biggest thing. And then everything after that was, I'd love to, if you want to get into it, I can get into the specifics, but I think that was massive for us. So I'll get on the same page.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that applies no matter what. I've heard that the term of a lot of discipleship leadership principles are fractal. I don't know if that's kind of a nerdy term, but that it multiplies the same level down. So it's not only is that true for a multi-site church, but if you're I'm not at a multi-site church. I'm at a church. I got 14, kids and 4 leaders. Well, you still have to get alignment with those 4 leaders. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think that's just as important as it is with multiple staff people. That principle is so critical. How do we strive for alignment with our leadership team? How do we strive for alignment with the student team? How do we strive for alignment just as a whole congregation, as a body?
1,000%.
That's super important.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, bud. I agree with that completely. Even for people that, so before I worked here, I've worked at some multi-site churches. I've worked at churches that are just, one site, a United Methodist church that was 80 people. Even there though, alignment, like you're saying, is key. Alignment just within the whole of your organization. If your student ministry is unaligned with the direction and leadership of your entire church, then I think you're just going to have problems. It's just going to be harder for you. So if you can build a ministry that's built around alignment within your organization, things I think will just come a little bit easier. It's not going to be easy, but things will come easier, I think.
Yeah. What were some values that you feel like, and maybe you have these hard copy? I would love to hear if you do. If not, maybe just kind of go in retrospect. During that season when you came on, and you're new, your youth director's new. What were some critical values? You're hey, these are what we're going to build our student ministry on. This is who we're going to be.
Yep. Yeah. Well, we eventually got hard copies of them. This was about a year ago. We had finally aligned and we had finally started working towards some things together. And then we got to that, evolutionary state of our ministry where it's I think it's time that we actually get some stuff on paper. What are our core values? So we have those. And they came just kind of out of organically and naturally the things that we were already doing. So whether, 3 years ago we could have put it down on paper or not, our core values, I think from the beginning, were really consistent, and they were partly pulled from Crossroads, like our church. We did not want to create a student ministry that had core values that were different from our whole organization, and then partly pulled from our leadership, from Joel. So they're hard copy. They're so hard copy that they're on my wall. You can see them right here. 6 posters, and all core values of our student ministry are on the wall. So I can read them off quickly to you.
Read them off.
Number in no order. Core value number 1, we're obsessive includers. So we have a core value, and then we have a belief statement that goes with that. So the core value is kind of the internal language. The belief statement is the external language. So from our stages, we'll say the belief statement, and the student might not be able to tell us what our core values are, but they've heard our belief statements for sure. So number 1, obsessive includers. The belief statement is you belong here and your friends do too. Every single service, we dismiss from service to groups. We call them C groups, but we dismiss to groups by the worship leader or the site director or the host for the service, by saying the same thing over and over again. That person on stage will say, and remember, you belong here, and the audience responds with, and my friends do too. So it's a core value. We are obsessive about including people in our ministry. Core value number 2, authenticity. Belief statement is we believe in being real. Core value number 3, adventure. The belief statement is we say yes. Core value number 4 is fun. We're unashamed to say fun is a core value for us. The belief statement is we don't take ourselves too seriously. And then core value number 5 is seeking and sharing truth. The belief statement is unfiltered talk and truth. That's on a lot of our merch. A lot of our merch says unfiltered talk and truth. The core value is seeking and sharing truth. And then our 6th core value is Jesus is at the core of everything we do. And that's a belief statement in itself, but that's our 6th, maybe most important, obviously, core value. So there you go.
Yeah. Which one of those has been the hardest to implement, or the toughest to catch on with with student ministry? Because I think it's like very easy to be like, these are the values, but then be like, is it working?
Yeah.
Are people doing them?
That's a great question.
And some of these are really tough. Like, it's really tough to see, like, how do you actually practically get that ingrained into not just like the mindset, but like see it in behavior. So I'm curious. Yeah. Like which one of those have been really tough?
I actually think obsessive includers was the most difficult. You belong here and your friends do too. We work for a church. I work for a church that, for example, Adventure, Crossroads as a whole, we kind of brand ourselves as spiritual outfitters. One of our kind of like, if you were just to go on our website,
it's like REI.
So you're born for adventure, basically. Yeah. So, for example, a core value of adventure was not hard at all, because that is just it's DNA in our church. So that wasn't hard for us to say, hey, we're going to go on a go trip, which is what we call a mission trip. We're going on a go trip to Nicaragua only for students, and our students and their parents. It wasn't a hard sell, right? Because we are all about adventure around Crossroads. So I felt like that was kind of already a part of our DNA as a ministry. Not that being obsessive includers wasn't. I mean, we're an incredibly, seeker-focused, evangelistic-focused church. But our student ministry for a long time was something that wasn't worth inviting to. When we said, hey, this is going to be an amazing experience, invite your friends, we just lost trust with people, because if they did invite their friends, and when their friends did come, it didn't live up to the hype. Like we eroded trust with people, because for the longest time, the thing that we were inviting them to just wasn't even worth it. It wasn't magnetic. It wasn't irresistible. So it took a long time, I think, for us to finally rebuild that culture in our ministry, where when we say from our stages, when we say in our groups, anything, you can trust us now, because simple things like an event or this past weekend or camp, sooner or later over time started to align with what we said from our stages. We said it was going to be great, and it ended up being great. We said it was going to be fun, and it ended up being fun. And for the longest time, I just don't think that was the case. So Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I think that's classic. Like the amount of conversations I have where it's like, well, we're gonna start this and we're gonna do this thing, we're gonna add this thing, and it's like, well, what if maybe? Well, hold on. I'm like, that's great. I'm not saying that God
Mm,
doesn't want you to do that, but is it possible that maybe you just need to make like the few things you're already doing a little bit
yeah.
better? Like, isn't
Yeah.
that like the classic Chick-fil-A Truett Kathy's like, we just decided we're gonna do fewer things better,
Yeah.
and know
Yeah.
that like if we keep making it better, people will share it because they love it,
Mm,
rather
mhm,
than just try to
mhm.
add new things that we feel like might be silver bullets for growing the ministry or for achieving like a certain outcome, or like you know. And I feel that tension a lot. Like right now we're struggling with like depth. We're saying, okay, we've reached a lot of new people, but we need to figure out how to like ramp up our student leadership core and get
Yeah.
some real discipleship depth, because while our
Mhm.
small groups are good at what they're good at, we struggle at like biblical literacy. We're struggling with like true, really queuing up our leaders for
Mhm.
extended discipleship conversations through what we do on
Mhm.
our Wednesday nights right now. So like that's where my
Yeah.
ministry's at. But it's,
Yeah.
and we're kind of going back and forth. Like, okay, what's the move? Do we add a new thing? Do we add another
Mhm.
format, or do we just like pivot and like get better at what we do on Wednesday? And
Yeah.
the answer is probably both. But I think to your point, like that's super important to be like, hey, like if you're gonna say something, like if you're gonna say like, hey, this event's gonna be fun, well then make that. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it does need to be fun, right?
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
So what were some
Yeah.
specific things on that you guys did to kind of like, you got all these loose bolts on your engine. Like how did you tighten everything down and be like, all right, we're
Yeah.
gonna actually make Wednesday nights or Sunday mornings or whatever we're doing. We're like, we're gonna actually make it good. Like, because you got to do
Yeah.
some practical things to make that happen. So what did it look like for you to practically tighten the bolts down?
Well, perfectly in line with this conversation, exactly what you were kind of talking about with like the Chick-fil-A model. There's a leadership book called The Pumpkin Patch. I think The Pumpkin Patch is what it's called. Don't quote me on the author. I don't know. I didn't read it, but our leadership team read it,
You got the cliff notes in a meeting.
and then brought it to our retreat. and the concept exactly what we're saying. All the really, really successful organizations around the world have one thing really in common. They are they are in everything that they do competitive with their markets. So maybe they're not the best in marketing, or they're not the best in customer relations, but they're at least competitive. But they are the best in one thing. So 1 to 2 things. So instead of your organization feeling this overwhelming tension to be the best at everything you do, there's a little bit of freedom and success to say, forget that. Let's just figure out what we're going to be the best in. Let's pick one thing that we are going to be the best at. Everything else we need to be competitive in. So we need to maybe raise the water level a little bit. We need to get better, but we are not going to be the best in anything. And we're going to be unashamed to say that. So when someone says, hey, so for us, for example, that first year, we said, we are going to be the best in our big experiences. So sure, someone might complain and say, you know what, groups right now, why is it not better than your big experience? Why does it feel like we care more about worship, building worship teams? Why does it feel like we care more about the service than we do groups right now? Well, we have the freedom and the permission to say it's because we do. We absolutely do. And we want to get better at groups, but it is not the most important thing right now. We are going to be the best in this thing. So over the 3 years, there's been iterations of it, but from the very beginning, we honed in on just the basics, the big and the small, which like every student ministry is built on. There's some type of big group experience. Doesn't matter if your youth group is 10 students or 1,000 students. There's some type of big group experience, and then a small group experience. And we went all in on the big first. Part of that strategically was because Crossroads has always been and always will be a church that cares more about gathering large groups of people and trying to work within that framework than the opposite. It's not that it's better or worse, but the opposite model is like, hey, let's invest in 5 people, and then those 5 people multiply to 8 people, and then those 8 people multiply to 20 people. Either way works, and there's churches that have been built on both models, but Crossroads has always been a church that is all about gathering large amounts of people.
Yeah.
First and foremost, with magnetic experiences. So we said, this is what our church is about. Yeah. Let's do this.
When you shared that, I was like, it takes 10 seconds, looking at your church's YouTube or Instagram page to be like, this church does big experiences really well.
Totally.
I mean, and whether, right, wrong, and different, however you feel about, that mega church and that kind of model or whatever. I think the point is, like, and if you're listening to this and you're like, I'm at a church of 120 people, like, we don't really do big experiences ever because we're not a big group. It's like, I just think the concept is like, hey, what's the momentum that your church is already riding behind? Because I'm like, that probably shows it's already a value for your senior leadership, for your elder board, for your however you're set up.
1,000%.
So I'm saying, like, well, it's probably a no-brainer for you guys. You're like, we've already got the mag life, we've already got these great experiences, we've already got really good MCs, we have all these, we have a world-class like CG team. So it's like, you can ride some amazing momentum, piggybacking off of what God's already, you're like the ant on the back of the elephant.
Totally.
You're like, hey, our church is already really good at this. Like, my church, I feel like, is here in Kansas City that I'm on staff at. It's like community. Like we've done like family, community, like really, really, and our volunteer culture is amazing. So like, we are statistically extremely high of attendees and members who volunteer and who are in leadership roles.
Groups.
So it was like,
cool.
And in groups, so we're like way higher than the national average for a church, like, in general. So it's like, that was really like that was like, hey, my big goal is like, I got to get the best leadership team I possibly can. Like, everything's going to rise and fall for us and our environment on the quality of our group time. And it's been really cool. Like, that's the number one thing that every student says when they come. They're like, that stays for a long time. They're like, it's small group. Like that's why I come, And as we've grown and scaled, like, that's been a huge deal to know, like, they're not coming because of me. They're not coming because of whatever's happening in the room alone, or just because it's fun. Not that those are not important, or the communication, or even to the teaching content, but that's the quality of relationships. But that's us. And I think all of those, there's biblical but there's biblical evidence for the importance of all of those things. But I think it's really important to realize, like to your point, what's your one thing that you're going to double down on and excel at? As you've focused on that, I would love to hear, what is it that you kind of feel stirring inside of yourself and you feel on your team, like, hey, I know as we've done this, like, this is where we're going, and this is really what the next phase of our ministry is going to look like for the future, and some other hills you guys want to take for the Lord. What is it that you guys are pivoting towards now?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. We are going to go on. We have a yearly staff retreat in February, and it's typically my favorite weekend of the year. Like, it is just full of fun. Obviously, our team is just full of, like, my best friends, but also it's super clarifying for us. Like, we just all align and go, what is this next year going to look like for us? So our first retreat, like I said, it was all about the big. We just wanted to crush it in big experiences. And then the second time around, we said, well, now it's time to go all in on groups and the small. And this year, I'm curious what it's going to be. I think it might be digital. It might be a first impression type of experience, which we need to really elevate all of our sites. So, as a whole organization, I'm really excited to learn that myself. Some of the things that we're running after right now are brand new big experiences that we're starting just for high schoolers. I can dig into a little bit if you're interested. But for me, at my site, I've felt like over the last year, over the last 3 years, it's felt like 10 years of change. It's just like constantly changing and growing, and it can be really, really exhausting because change is tiring. Even for someone like me, I really like change, but change is tiring. So over all of those iterations and steps of evolution of the ministry, I think finally it became kind of clear to me that it was time for me to start becoming pastor. I don't even know exactly what that means. It was something I think that God was speaking to me a few months ago, and I'm trying to kind of clarify, especially over the new year, maybe over Christmas break. I'll get a little more clarity from him. But all of a sudden, out of nowhere, it felt like I would just like have this church on my hands, like legitimately a church, like full of people, young people, and volunteers and leaders. And as much focus as I was putting on pioneering and growing, it was time that I also started wearing a pastoring hat, because at what point does just gathering become what's the point of gathering, right? If there's not fruit that comes from it, and there's not students who come to know Jesus and grow in their relationship with God, and all that. Obviously that's been happening throughout the year, but like you said, everything rises and falls with leadership. So I think God was trying to protect me and protect our ministry, that if we aren't really intentional about these things, then they just won't happen. So anyways, and at the same time, Ryan, right above me, hanging on my wall, is like a big vision poster for me and my entire staff to always remember what's most important around here. And it's a way that we track our attendance to our ultimate goal, which is 1,000 students, a minimum of 1,000 students. We're just unashamed to say, like, we just want more students in our ministry. So we're going to care a ton about growth. We're going to care a ton about new people coming here. And it might be at the expense of some things that people might get a little squirmy about. You might be, well, what about the students that have been coming for a long time and they want to go deeper? It's not that we don't care about them. It's just that we care more about new students meeting Jesus. We're just going to always care more about that. So it's a little bit of both. It's like trying to wear and figure out how to wear both hats. How do you pioneer and how do you pastor? And I'm really excited about that for me as a leader. I'm excited to grow this year and see what God has for me, and watch the ways that he kind of shows up in my weaknesses and stuff like that.
I always think about the scripture in Ephesians 4, when Paul says, so Christ himself gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the pastors, and teachers to equip his people for the work of service, so that the body of Christ might be built up until we all reach unity in the faith, in the knowledge of the Son of God, and become mature, attaining to the whole measure of the fullness of Christ. Then we'll no longer be infants, tossed to and back and forth by waves, blown here and there by every wind of teaching and cunning and craftiness of people and their deceitful scheming. And he goes on talking about like all the ministry of like having a mature, strong church. And I just think like it's just the nature of us in like student ministry. We're young, but the majority of people that are in ministry, and obviously, shout out to you old dogs who are like, you're like, I'm 50 and I'm in the game. I love it. That's what you need to DM me and we'll bring you on to the podcast.
And we need more of them. We need more of them. We need more senior people leading in student ministry.
100%. But I just feel like I have so many times in my life felt so much pressure to be the perfect evangelist, pastor, shepherd, teacher, prophet. And it's impossible. Like no one's good at all of those things. Like, and it's kind of like, that's sort of like the pitch. I feel like for youth pastors, they feel like I have to be a great teacher, and I have to be a great shepherd and a great evangelist and I have to start all these new things. I have to be a great apostle. Like I have to do all these, like how do I do it all? And I think the reality is you can't. Like hearing you talk for a few minutes, like you're an evangelist. You have an apostolic gift of starting and launching and pushing and pioneering, all that. Light came on in my office. Yeah, the motion light.
Come on,
I
man.
love like the motion light is like
Let there be
my
light,
office
dude.
is real narrow, and like the motion light is like pointed at my office door, and my desk is like in the far side, so it's like it just turns on and off all day long. Hence the lamp.
I liked the vibe of the purple light a little bit better, but this still works.
Yeah, it'll turn off soon. But back to how have you seen that in your life? Like, how have you kind of grown in your own self-awareness? Because I think like that's super important for leaders, especially if you're newer, to be like, I know who I am and I know who I'm not. And I know maybe who I need to become. Like, I love that you're like, I realize that I need to become a better pastor. I knew for me, like my campus pastor is like probably the greatest pastor I've ever met in my entire life. He's not just my boss. He's not my campus pastor. He's a mentor. And he's taught me how to pastor people, because I realized like that's not a strength of mine. But how have you seen your own soul change and evolve, and God reveal, this is what you're good at, and this is what you're not, and how have you kind of maybe compensated or brought people in around your weaknesses? would love to have more
Yeah.
conversation about your personal leadership.
Yeah. Well, I think two things that come to mind are maybe in this like journey of, if you want to call it self-discovery, figuring out what I'm good at and what I'm not good at. 10% of it was, I feel like 10%, maybe 20%. These numbers are obviously irrelevant, but 10 to 20% of it was experience, like just doing a job and figuring out what worked for me and where I knocked it out of the park and where I felt like I could barely lay down a bunt, you know? And then the vast majority of self-discovery just came from other people. Having people around me that were different than me, it became very clear. Like it was way easier to see what I was good at and what I was not good at in other people than just trying to figure it out myself and learn along the way and go, why didn't that work? You know, like we're not, even the most self-aware people, like we're not really that self-aware. It takes other people around us. It takes people pointing out our strengths and our weaknesses for us to, I think, like really discover who we are. And I think God just really, really took care of me and put some amazing people, really good leaders who were totally different than me around me. And it was really clear just by watching them do what they do that they were gifted in ways that I was not gifted in. And then they would call out my gifting. And it just became probably the quickest way that I became self-aware and still is. So when I see someone who is really, really, really gifted in shepherding, and I watch how they just operate on a totally different level and react to things and handle challenges differently than I ever would, it doesn't make me, self-conscious. It only makes me honestly grateful for team, right? Like the biblical way to say it is the body, right? It makes me thankful for that there are people with different gifting than me, but also makes me feel more confident in my own gifting. So yeah, I think a lot of it was just people calling out things in me, and then me being able to see people operate differently than me.
Yeah. What would you say are some keys for personal development and growth that you've seen in your own life to help you keep your fire fresh? Because I can, in our conversation, like you're excited about what God's doing. Like you're pumped up about what you do, about leading, about pioneering into the future. And you don't keep that fire. You don't stay that passionate unless you're continuously reinventing yourself and adding logs to the fire of your own personal leadership and your own soul spiritually in your relationship with Christ. So what does that look like for you? Just keep growing.
Two things. I think the two biggest things for me that's like elevated my growth and continued to stoke the fire of passion are team and mentors. Team and mentors. And if you have both of them, man, you are going to operate in your best gifting. Someone said, I did not come up with this. I don't even know who did, but I remember a long time ago someone said this to me, and it's just stuck. You are at your best when you're doing what you love with who you love. So if you have a team around you of people that are on mission together and aligned, and they're talented and you're talented and they're passionate and you're passionate, like attracts like, right? So if you find yourself with really, 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 passionate people, you're probably just going to be attracted to those people naturally. So if you have team, and if team is strong for you, I think that can help you grow and can keep you really, really excited and stoke those fires. But also mentors, and obviously on the growth side of things, mentors probably is more important for growth, and team is more excited for passion and longevity. But they all play hand in hand. So the worst seasons for me, when I was at my absolute worst, was when, it's really cliche, when I was pouring out and no one was pouring into me. And when the best was when I just had someone really, really pastoral pouring into me.
Yeah. They always say, I've always heard this, I don't know whose they is.
Yeah.
That like, you shouldn't take advice from somebody who hasn't been there before, or, whatever. Right. I don't really think that that's necessarily true. I think that the biggest thing that I've seen And everybody's context is different. It depends on what you're asking. If
Mm-hmm.
we're talking about getting advice, or we're
Mm-hmm.
talking about really development, because, obviously if you're listening to this, I'm passionate about the concept of coaching. And one of the really paradigm shifting things for me in that space is great coaches aren't because they were the best players. It's not like the best coaches were the best NFL players. It's not like the best coaches were the best in that field. They're just the people that are willing to push the people that are on their team where nobody else will push them. So it's like, who in your life is a friend? Who is someone who could be a mentor or even a peer? They don't necessarily have to be like world's genius youth pastor, but they're just somebody who's willing to ask you and to hold you accountable to things that nobody else is willing to do it. Because I think like that's critical. Like, because God's going to use that, like the heart, somebody to willing to hold you accountable to what you say you're going to do, to challenge you to think differently on the days when you just want to mail it in. Like those are critical. At least for me. I mean, my greatest mentor, we were talking about this earlier, a guy named Zach, who's a guy at our church. He's never been a youth pastor. He's never been on a church staff. He's just a dad, but he's willing to ask me really hard questions about my ministry that nobody else is asking me. And I'm like that's changed my leadership and our ministry more than almost anything else has from a personal development side, to keep pushing forward towards what we haven't, where we haven't, and to bring me back to what's true. But I appreciate you sharing that, just about like surrounding yourself with team, and being around great mentors. What's maybe some wisdom that you've got for anybody listening? How do you, let's start with team. Maybe you're listening to this and you are struggling with your team right now. You're like, I got some volunteers, but I don't really know where to go with them. What would be some encouragement you've had to help build team, maybe from scratch?
Yeah. Wow. I'll just shoot from the hip here. So none of this is super profound. But the first thing that comes to mind, especially when it comes to building team, is building culture. And someone again told me this. I'm not an original person. I've stolen every good thing that I'm going to say on this podcast from somebody
Neither
else.
is anybody else.
That's right. That's right. So somebody once told me culture is what you tolerate. It's maybe been the easiest way for me to understand culture. I think team and culture are hand in hand. There's this myth that says if you aren't intentional about developing culture or team culture, then it won't be developed. It's a myth because it will be. It will be. Culture will be created one way or the other. It'll be created if you create it or someone else creates it. If you're not intentional about creating healthy culture, unhealthy culture is just going to be created. So for me, when I think about building team, a lot of what I'm thinking about are things that we just talked about. Like, what are the values that I want to exist on this team? What do I want this team culture to be like and be about? I think if you're a team builder, so I think a lot of us in ministry find ourselves wearing two hats. We're on a team and we build teams. So if you're a team builder, then I think that your culture should be rooted to some degree in your gifting and in your skills. If you're the leader of a team, then I think your team culture should be rooted. It feels weird to say that because a lot of people want to push against this idea of like, well, it's not the me show. I got to be humble and I've got to lay my, as a leader, I got to lay my life down. I got to serve and whatever. And all that is true. But if you're a team builder, if you're a leader of a team, then you should surround yourself with people who, one, are like going to complement your gifts and strengths, two, who are excited about your gifts and strengths, and want to elevate those things. So your team culture should be rooted in the things that you care about and are most passionate about. If not, you're not going to be able to sustain it. If I found myself trying to lead a team that its culture and goals were oriented around things that I just was not passionate and excited and gifted and skilled in, there's no way I'm going to wake up in the morning for 5 years straight and just be excited to lead the team. I have to be leading teams that are somewhat rooted in what I believe and what I'm excited about and what I'm skilled and gifted in. And not to say that you need to put people around you that are identical to you. You just all have to be at least aligned in the important things, in your values and stuff like that. So that's just from the hip. Like I think team builders, especially if you're starting from scratch, culture is carried by people. It's not this anomaly. It's not this like force. It's not, gravity or, it's not magic. Culture lives in people. So if you're going to build culture and you want culture to carry, then it's going to be carried by people. So, culture is what you tolerate, meaning, the people you tolerate will, lead you to the culture that you tolerate. So it's important to really surround yourself with people that are in alignment with you and be obviously loving. This sounds really harsh. I know we work for churches, but like, Jesus did this. Like Jesus was grace and truth, and he was invitation, and he was challenge. If there are people who are feel like it's their life mission to pull you out of your anointing and pull you out of your gifting and pull you away from your vision, you need to cut those people off and leave them by the side of the road. Those people do not belong on your team. They're just going to distract you, and they're going to create a culture on your team that just it doesn't belong. So anyways, it's a people game. Culture is all about people, and the type of people you tolerate on your team are will lead you to the type of culture that you ultimately tolerate.
Yeah, let's talk for a second just about mentorship and getting more of that, maybe if you're in a season where you don't have it, or, I think that you can't ever have too much of that, of people pouring into you.
Mm-hmm.
What does that look like for you? And maybe some words of wisdom on that. Like, how do you build great mentors into your life?
Well, man, I have been really lucky in the times where I've had like the best mentors, and I'm curious maybe what you would say, Ryan. I wonder if this is consistent. I have a hunch that it probably is, because God cares a ton about me. Like God loves me, and he wants me to grow, and he wants me to be more like his son, Jesus. So, and he knows I can't do that alone. So the times when I've had like the best mentors in my life, it almost felt kind of miraculous. Like people that I never would have expected just came out of nowhere and almost invited me into those relationships. And said, Brody, I would love to mentor you. That's been like one really interesting, consistent through line in my journey with having mentors. The best ones and the times where I've grown the most are people who have always sought to mentor me. Not to say that that's always going to happen. I think there's a lot of work that has to be done in a relationship with mentors, as much for the mentor and the mentee. But the thing that I think is most important with mentors is just remembering like basic truth about people. There is no such thing outside of Jesus as the perfect person. So if you're looking to find the perfect mentor who is going to be able to develop you in every area of your life, you're never going to find them. So I think, and I believe in a model where you can have multiple mentors. So if there's someone who you deeply respect the way that they manage money, ask them to mentor you in your finances. They might be the absolute worst person to mentor you in their marriage. Like maybe they have just a terrible marriage, but you really respect the way that they manage their finances. Make sure that person is mentoring you in your finances, but not your marriage. So it's okay to have 3 to 4 mentors, I think. But if you're looking for one person to be everything for you, it's just not going to happen.
Yeah, I think that's so true. Like I like Tim Ferriss in a lot of ways. He's got, obviously, somebody who makes podcasts and people who are in that space. But like his book, Tribe of Mentors, is this concept of like, it's all these little excerpts from people he's interviewed over the years on his podcast. Because he's like, that's why I bring them on, because I know they're not they're not great at everything, but they're exceptional at something. And to your point, like knowing that there's going to be people that, whether it's a proficient skill that you're deficient in, or to what I was kind of saying earlier, like I hang out with certain people, not because necessarily of like they're excellent in anything, but maybe the thing that they are excellent in is question asking. Like they're the people that are going to challenge me in asking questions that nobody else is going to ask. Whether that's a personal accountability question in my like holiness or walk with God, or sin issues, or my marriage, or just in my ministry. And so I think having people like that are going to be true friends, who aren't going to hold back, who are true mentors, who are going to really be willing to tell you what's true, even when it's difficult, At least I've seen that, over and over again is invaluable.
Yeah.
Well, Brody, thanks so much for your time today, coming and telling us a ton of wisdom,
of course,
just about, and a little bit of your story. I mean, it's like God's up to some amazing things, in your church. So maybe as we wrap up, what's just a couple last words of encouragement that you would maybe have for anybody listening, as far as maybe they might be discouraged, maybe they're wrestling with where they're at in ministry. How would you encourage anybody listening to this today?
Yeah, well, my biggest piece of encouragement is just hold on. Just keep standing. I think that there is, at least from my short time in ministry, one of the key things that I can point to where God has consistently showed up is when I have just chosen defiantly not to quit in hard seasons. And I've chosen to stand and remain standing and overcome even when it's really, really hard. And like at the end of these really long, exhaustive seasons is when I feel like I've seen God most. And I think that we quit a lot. We quit a lot of things in our culture. So I'm not a culture expert, definitely not like an American, culture expert at all. But at least for my life, I mean, my attention span is short. I'm really impatient. And if I don't get immediate gratification, then I'm typically going to quit something. I think in the past when I've done that, I have really missed out on things that God wants for me. So if you find yourself in a season where you are you're at the end of your rope, just hold on, because I think God has something really, really special in suffering, and it's a weird version of encouragement, but it at least has been true in my life. So thanks, Ryan. Thanks for having me on, man. I appreciate you.
Absolutely. And Brady, how can people be following you? How can they be tracking with you if they want to keep up with what you're doing? If they want to reach out to you, maybe they're like, man, he's got a lot of great wisdom. I'd love to pick his brain on what they did to help bring alignment to the team, or how they tighten some things up. I know I've had some pretty transformative conversations with people that I listened to on a podcast, and I heard them share their stuff, and I reached out to them via email or whatever, or Instagram. So how can people get a hold of you, man?
Well, I mean, I'll give you you have my email and my phone number, Ryan. So if you just want to put it like in the show notes or whatever, anyone can text me, call me, email me. I do not care. I'm not a celebrity, and there's not a lot of people knocking on my door. So I'm willing to take any phone call if it'll help anyone. If people are interested in following along with what our student ministry is doing on Instagram, they can follow Crossroads Students and keep in touch.
Amazing. Well, thanks so much, Brody. You were
thanks,
the man,
Ryan.
and God's doing some huge things in your life and in your ministry. So thanks for sharing.
Thanks, bro. Appreciate you. Thank you for having me on, and love what you're doing, dude. We need it. We need more encouragement for youth pastors. So thanks, bud.